a brigade which was in the south in Zaporizhia is now being moved to Kharkiv to deal with this possible Russian threat. Well, you know, there's been a focus by the Russians in trying to choke off the Ukrainian economy in many ways, you know, hitting infrastructure, but lately, as you point out, you know, trying to stop the grain shipments from going through. So they're hitting the coastal cities, and of course Odessa last night. I mean, they used 15 drones and also 8 caliber missiles. So these were sea missiles, which also is another interesting development. The way that while the land counteroffensive has stalled a bit, you know, the way the action has ratcheted up offshore in the seas.
I mean, there was this grain deal that was sort of signed to some kind of acclaim. We know that that's collapsed. These warning shots at the actual sort of barge that was carrying it, the kind of vessel carrying it. Is that the first time we've seen an intent to directly target a grain vessel since the collapse of that grain deal?
Yeah, it's the first time that shots have been fired. Now, I'm not entirely sure the vessel was, you know, targeted. Otherwise, they'd have sunk it. But it's certainly, you know, the first time that warning shots had been fired, should obviously, you know, make it more difficult, you know, to carry out these voyages, and also, of course, you know, raises, you know, things like the cost of insurance on these trips as well. You're absolutely right. You know, this grain deal was seen as a, you know, great way forward, with food prices shooting up everywhere, especially in third world countries. But Russia pulled out of it. There's recriminations from both sides. And now, you know, what was an economic standoff is rapidly, unfortunately, becoming a military one.
Well, if we look at the economics for a time, obviously there's the attempt to economically strangle Ukraine by Russia. You know, and economic sanctions have always been a part of conflicts. But similarly, we're seeing that the value of the ruble continues to fall. So Russia's kind of feeling a lot of economic pain as well. Are we hearing sort of any ramifications of that in terms of pressure that's put on the leadership in Moscow, or there's some hints that Russia's now not funding mercenary groups like the Wagner Group anymore, so they're saving their money and reallocating it to other parts of the war? Do we know much more, or is it still being kept murky at the Russian end?
Well, it's confusing and also, as you say, opaque at the Russian end. Now, you know, there have been mixed messages about how badly or how well the Russian economy has been doing since the war. It's true they probably hasn't suffered as badly as the West hoped, but at the same time, it's obviously having an effect. You know, the sanctions, and also, of course, the fact that so much of their industry is now geared towards war production, you know, producing weapons and ammunition. So that again is a problem. The fall in the value of the ruble is in a quite significant, and it seems that one of the reasons behind is that the price cap which had been put on Russian oil is now at last beginning to have a bite. If you recall, you know, you had, you know, vast consumers like China and India buying huge quantity of this oil. Now, some, not China, but some of the others have now agreed on this price cap, i.e., nothing below a certain amount. So Russians can't sell the oil as cheaply as they were, and you know that appears to be having a ripple effect through their finances, as well as, you know, the sheer economic war and tear of a war that's been going on now for 18 months. Russians are still firing 2 to 3 times more artillery rounds, for example, in the battlefield than the Ukrainians. And of course, you know, while Ukraine is getting supplied by the West, not to the extent they would like, but getting supplied by the West, Russia has to generate their own munitions, apart from drones they get from Iran, for example, and some Chinese stuff. So yes, you know, I mean, the pressure of war is telling on their economy.
And in terms of where you are in Kyiv, how bullish is the administration in Kyiv that this spring, but really a summer offensive to push Russia back, to reclaim strips of land, to reassert themselves, and to kind of get on top, if you like, is actually succeeding?
Well, I think we have got to accept that it hasn't moved to anything like as fast as some people hoped. Now, I remember being here around this time last year when suddenly the Russian front line around Kharkiv just basically collapsed, and the Ukrainian army and us journalists raced through them, at the rate of knots. Um, Now, what's interesting is the Russians have regrouped in the Kharkiv region, and they are now threatening a city called Kupiansk, which is a a logistics hub, a transport hub. There are reports up to 100,000 Russians are being deployed there. That may or may not be true, but the Ukrainian government has been carrying out evacuations of the villages around Kupiansk because of the constant shelling. So the Russians are also trying to carry out their own land operations. And one reason for that is that they are diverting Ukrainian resources. For example, a brigade which was in the south in Zaporizhia is now being moved to Kharkiv to deal with this possible Russian threat. There's a game of chess being played here, but I don't think we're going to see, a sort of, an astonishing drive for Crimea, as had been portrayed perhaps, a couple of months ago.